This is Derek, and my guest today is Ken Macintosh. Welcome.
Good morning, Derek.
An MSP since 1999, so you've been there throughout the whole devolution period. I mean, in a way, that's 4 elections. That's an achievement. I mean, to what extent is that down to Ken, do you think, and is that down to the success? Well, the success of the Labour Party actually is what that is built on, is it not? I mean, the original, before we got into this sort of current last couple of years of serious difficulty for Labour.
Yes, I think you can certainly overestimate your own contribution, although that doesn't stop us as politicians doing so. I've got a number of observations to make about that. First of all, as a politician, I've undoubtedly matured over those 4 elections. I've approached each of them suspecting, in fact in some cases knowing I was going to lose. At the last election, 2011, my powers of foresight were such that I was predicted to lose by 3,000, but I thought my party would do very well, and of course got it completely wrong. Yeah. I ended up increasing my vote and we lost.
Do you know why? I mean, you obviously look back at that, is there an explanation that makes sense?
If you could put your finger on exactly why, you'd be permanently elected, I suspect. So it's not as easy as that. And I know that you can over exaggerate your own influence and the power of your own individuality, because I'd like to think, and I've got a very strong message, that my own integrity, the fact that repeatedly when tested I've always put my constituents first, that helps, and it's undoubtedly helped to some extent and in some elections. But if you look at what happened at the last election, we had great constituency MPs like Russell Brown and Dumfries, just one example, but there's quite a few of them who are phenomenal individual people for working for their communities, with or without the party label. They all got swept away. So I think that there are sometimes in a tide of political opinion that no matter how good you are as an individual, that's not going to save you.
But this seems to be in running in Scotland. I mean, that happens at things like by-elections or, the occasional general election, like Labour winning in 97, it's true. But this does seem to be a kind of a long-running tide for the SNP.
Yeah, what I would...
It's a phenomenon, really, that I haven't encountered before. I mean, I can't explain it either.
Well, is it a phenomenon? Is the election we've just had not quite akin to that of 97 and 99? For me, it was. I mean, I felt similarly euphoric when Labour was swept to power, both when Tony Blair won in 97 and then when we won in Parliament in 99, and didn't quite expect it in the way it was. I would also say, if you are to be slightly detached, very difficult for a politician, but if you were to be slightly detached, you can see it's a long-term decline. So the votes, the Labour Party votes, go down in a pretty steady succession. Now, you could take 2010 as the general election, 2010 as the exception, and the one we've just had there also as slightly out of line, but very much in keeping. It's just that first past the post hugely exaggerates the effect.
Exactly. Like, in other words, you get a movement, but with the voting system, you get a tipping point, and once you reach that tipping point, you're just down the other side of the abyss, really, aren't you?
You're absolutely right, and it is an abyss.
Yeah. Well, it's not much of a kind of prospect for you when you're saying, well, I want to lead us, we're falling over the abyss. That's quite difficult, isn't it? I mean, do you think it's the right time to be having a leadership campaign? I mean, if we go back to when Jack McConnell, when the SNP won in 2007, became the biggest party, I thought then it was maybe time for Labour to have a good examination of issues, who we are, identity, what's our purpose, etc. But subsequently to that, it's always been a kind of a rush to another leader. I can understand that, but is there not something more fundamental required before we decide who we want to lead, whatever this party is?
I have to say, I share your analysis there. I think that, and particularly with the comparison with Jack McConnell, I was particularly keen that Jack got elected.
You worked with Jack, didn't you? Were you in his office or something?
No, I never did, no.
I thought you were his parliamentary assistant or something.
I was his ministerial aide, yes, before I resigned over the Victoria Hospital, or then came back as his aide. But that was just because I was always a big supporter, because Jack had something, first of all, he was a devolutionist, so he was the first of what I thought of the new generation of leaders. Didn't come from Westminster, no Westminster baggage, had a particularly strong view of the Scottish Parliament. Unfortunately, for various reasons, it didn't quite take fire the way, catch hold the way I thought it would. I don't know quite why we didn't, but because I thought that Jack was the person that would have caught the whole mood of devolution that the Labour Party has never quite caught. And yes, you're again absolutely right. What we do is every time we lose an election, we chop the leader's head off, and then immediately start focusing on the next election, as if somehow putting a new face on there makes a difference.
To be fair, you kind of had to do that with, when Joanne stood down. I mean, it was 6 months from an election. I mean, that was, I thought Jim would have done more to shore up support, to be fair, but it was never going to be a win-win situation, that. I mean, in such a short period of time.
Yes, I mean, I don't think, I would defy anybody to have turned that around. I mean, some of the situations we've been in, I mean, Donald, you're dying. I mean, there's a lot of them were they're not of our making, Well, that's what happens. They say events, dear boy, events, in politics. But the fundamental issue is, yes, our vote keeps declining, and we keep not quite getting it. So one of the first things I said in this election is, look, my focus is not next year's election. It's about changing the party to be a different kind of party. And I don't. You start off by saying we're facing an abyss. But in some ways, that's the time that inspires you in politics. I joined the party in the early 80s when we were in a pretty difficult situation then. And it's very interesting that although people talk about people joining the SNP at the moment, a lot of people are joining our party at the moment, young people. So it's a time to stick your chest out and put your chin up and lead from the front, I think.
I mean, in the 80s, I remember Labour MPs at that time, some of them were profoundly depressed. It was a long period of time. And I think it got to the stage where they began to wonder, will we ever actually, in their career lifetime, be in power again? And I remember speaking to John Reid at that time, and he was saying, we'll need to form an alliance with the Liberals. We'll need to change the voting system, otherwise Labour are going to be out forever. But, 97 did eventually come round. That's
right. John O'Farrell wrote a very funny book about it, which is a parallel to the story of my life. I joined the Labour Party thinking our job was to always lose elections, because I fought so many elections as a campaigner, always losing. But the point is you never give up hope, because in the end, you're in it because of the values that you hold. And I think in the end, there is light at the end of the tunnel, and there is the hope that, in fact, that you can see the people of Scotland. When you chat to people in Scotland, they don't disagree with you. They do share your values. I mean, even the language they use. They often say things like, what's the current one? We haven't left you, you've left us, And you're going, well, I haven't changed my values, so clearly the message isn't getting across, so we need to change the message. But in the end, people want a better, fairer society, decent work, a secure home, a good education, social mobility, all the things the Labour Party stands for. So you need to find a different way of expressing it.
Well, but it's part of this issue, though, that they've been clever, the SNP, because if we describe that as having originally been Labour territory, people might debate that, but that's your view, that those social democratic values are Labour values. Yeah. They're part right on your territory. They've done it very successfully. And the trick now is to kind of find either another way of expressing that or to find different values, to find a different niche, as it were, is it not?
Well, I absolutely disagree with you that we should find different values. I mean, I absolutely fundamentally disagree. Yeah, well, because people say that. They say that the SNP have parked their tanks on our lawn and therefore we should get off the lawn. I mean, that's ridiculous. That's utterly the wrong thing to do. What we should do is welcome them. If they have reinvented themselves as a social democratic party of the centre-left, we should embrace that. We should say, great, we have won the argument. We have won in the sense that progressive values have dominated and are going to dominate Scottish politics. And rather than be angry at the SNP, which is all that people ever hear from us, angry, bitter, resentful comments, who wants to vote for a politician that's angry at another politician? What they want is somebody to fight for them. So if another politician says, we share your progressive values, well, we should embrace that, try and work with them, test them, because I would actually suggest that, the SNP's commitment to progressive values is a little bit suspect. But, at least they're willing to use the word, so let's embrace them in that. And let's perhaps adopt a similar long-term strategy that's about our position on the centre-left. And I think where we are losing out at the moment is we haven't quite embraced the modern workforce. We're still slightly living in Labour's past rather than Scotland's future. So we're very proud of our collectivism. But the workforce is not a big mass industrial workforce anymore. People are working by themselves, a growth in small business. And we need to change our language to appeal to that, to make sure that people think that when we're talking about better working conditions, good wages, standing on 2 feet, celebrating success, we mean them.
So is that a possible strategy then where you could focus on specific areas that you could, if you like, you become the flag bearer or the champion of, say it was, the economy and employment, or one of the other suggestions I was making but got a very cool response from a Labour person was Europe, who's the party of Europe in Scotland, So is that a possible approach to take?
Well, I'm a little sceptical of that too. Well, in the past, it's been one of the approaches that we've used in recent years, which I think you might think is part of our decline, is, and it's something the SNP do, so maybe it does work, but it's to divide the electorate up into different groups and then build a coalition of these groups. So you appeal to the Catholic vote, if there is such a thing. You appeal to the working class male. You appeal to the anti-Trident vote. You appeal to the liberal, and you build up a coalition of these interests. And there are a number of people in the party who think that's the way to do it. I'm not one of those at all, simply because that doesn't reflect my thinking. My values are, very much about social justice, about living in a society where we recognise each other's selfishness, but you build on your selflessness, and you build on the fact that we care about each other and we need each other to survive, that we all prosper in a fairer society. And I think that cuts across. And I wouldn't want to compartmentalise our vote in that way.
Is the attempts of Scottish Labour to find that voice, that distinctive voice, compromised by what happens south of the border, where the parties run from? I mean, the whole thing about the branch office, but the policies and the things that we hear Labour politicians say at Westminster, which sometimes, to a Scottish ear jars, and you think, well, actually, that's not what they think in Scotland.
Yes. There's probably an element of that. I mean, I certainly, again, in laying up my leadership campaign, one of the things I was very keen to do was to stress that we are an autonomous party here in Scotland that chooses to be part of the UK Labour Party. So I'm very proud of the fact we're in a big Labour movement and an internationalist by vision. But I've never looked over my shoulder myself at Westminster. I've never been interested in standing for Westminster. But I think it's important that you demonstrate that in practice. So I've said that we will negotiate a formal agreement with the rest of the UK Labour Party just to recognise our autonomy. But having said that, you can look at things different ways. And it's the same for the whole of Scotland, not just the Labour movement. You can look at the rest of the UK and stress how different we are. So we like to pride ourselves on being slightly more pro-European, you've suggested, slightly more communitarian, slightly more collectivist in our approach. A slightly less unequal society, more likely to use the NHS and state schools and so on. But if you were to look at it, the differences, what you're actually doing is ignoring the fact that on broad terms we're enormously similar. The similarities far outweigh the differences. So there are nuances, and it's whether or not you play to those nuances of the differences, or actually, take Europe, Scotland is slightly more pro-European than the rest of the country, but there's a lot of skeptics, European skeptics in Scotland. So we're slightly more, we're less scared about immigration, more liberal in immigration, but we're not. There's a lot of pretty reactionary people in our communities about immigration too, and so we have the same views. So I don't really recognise that people. There's an argument, particularly being put that the Labour Party down south is moving to the right and we have to move to the left. Utterly reject that. In fact, I reject the whole. If we're thinking our politics in terms of left and right, so old-fashioned. It's not where people are anymore. It's class war and it's gone.
And yet, if you look at the way the Scots are voting, it does seem to indicate that they feel there's a difference. That the politics of Scotland looks and feels entirely different. Even the SNP bloc we've sent down to Westminster sound like a different breed of people.
Yeah.
If you look at the policies that we're introducing in Scotland, they're quite different from what they have in the rest of the UK.
Well, are they?
Well, I think they are. Yeah. I mean, the kind of idea of having universal benefits, for example, is being pared back systematically across the UK.
It is indeed. But the thing is that the Scottish government talk a lot about what they resist in Westminster. Well, what are they actually doing? I mean, what's the Scottish government's record on benefits? They complain about welfare cuts down south, but what they're doing is they're driving up the cost of the care tax in Scotland on disabled and elderly people. Totally set in Scotland, entirely set, implemented here, paid for here, and yet we're willing to charge disabled people more for all the services they need. I mean, what I would suggest is we need to challenge the actual decisions as opposed to the rhetoric of the government here, because they talk a good game. I'm very sceptical about how progressive they are in reality.
But isn't talking a good game part of politics?
Yeah,
the marketing side, and I'm not disagreeing with that. They have been masterful at kind of presenting what I think for Scots. You're right in saying that the British Attitude Survey shows that a lot of our differences are not very, very great at all. But there's an aspiration in Scotland to be different. We want to be more.
Absolutely,
people in Scotland are proud to be working class as opposed to middle class, which is much more of an English aspiration, I think. But they've captured that idea, that the aspiration is as important as the reality.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And in some ways,
nothing wrong with talking a good game in politics.
Yeah, exactly. I think you are right. The SNP are very good at talking up one thing but actually doing another. So talk about progressive policies but introduce regressive taxation and policies that don't distribute or tackle inequality. And you're right, the whole Scottish thing being quite thrown about the fact we love the fact that we regard ourselves as different. So we're proud of our either our working class roots or our roots, the struggle that we've been engaged in all our lives. We're proud of that. And we're more likely to refer to that than we are to being middle class and moving to
we want to be different.
Yeah, but all the Scots also want they want a nice telly, a nice car, a nice house like everybody else. So yes, so you're right. They've mastered that technique of saying one thing and perhaps doing another. But I'm not saying that we copy them by doing that either. Hypocrisy is not an attractive trait in a politician. And in the end, I think they'll be found out. I mean, I do think that. I think it's part of our job to find them out.
When? I mean, if this is a honeymoon, it's going on a bloody long time.
Right away, actually. I know it sounds funny, but I think one of the things we could do, just a service we would do to the people of Scotland, is to become a more constructive opposition. Yes, I want to win. I want to win, and fundamentally I'm standing as leader so we can win again. But the first thing we do to achieve that is to become a more constructive opposition. We are so oppositional at the moment, I find. Our default position is to oppose anything the SNP do. Now, I understand, and I'm brought up in a tradition where the SNP were slightly an irrelevance to me. We were opposed to the Tories, and it was a class war, and it was a them and us. But that's gone now, and in a multi-party Scotland, if all you do is offer an alternative to the Tories, there are a multitude of alternatives to the Tories, and they don't have to choose the Labour version, and that's what we've discovered. But we've taken that same oppositional position to the Tories to the SNP, but they're not the same. They've copied our policies on the health service, on education, they have. I mean, they just lifted them lock, stock and barrel, added a few extra numbers in the end in most cases, and said, because they deliberately copied us as a model. They said, we will become the Social Democratic Party of Scotland. A very clear, explicit strategy. Down to when they came into power in 2007, they continued virtually all the policies we had in place. Getting it right for every child, the curriculum for excellence, class sizes even. They just outbid us on some of these things. We were trying to be responsible and reasonable. They said, no, we'll have class sizes of 18 and, or we'll have the local income tax and, things that never happened. Free school meals for everybody. I mean, none of these things ever happened. We'll abolish student debt. I mean, just ridiculous promises. But they were allowed off the hook because of the recession, because of the Tories, and because of us. Because in the end, we were so opposed to them that we treated every single thing they did as their fault. Everything that's wrong in Scotland is the fault of the SNP. And that's clearly an intellectually dishonest position.
So that devalues the currency when you think you've got a legitimate, hard argument to put.
Exactly.
People are not really listening to that. That's
exactly. You've put it in a nutshell. They're not listening to us. And we found that to our cost. So we weren't able to explain at the last election the policy. We were trying to say, look, we're anti-austerity, and it's important to oppose austerity. And they said, yeah, we will. We'll vote SNP to oppose austerity. And we want to protect the NHS. It's really important that it's under threat. And people said, yeah, you're right. I'll vote SNP to protect the NHS. And we're going, don't be ridiculous. That's not going to happen. They weren't listening. They heard the message and they didn't trust us. There's a fundamental difficulty there. So our policies, we had great policies in some issues. I'm not sure that people really dissected them and the SNP policy on full fiscal autonomy. It's a bonkers policy, but did we get across that?
Running your own affairs.
Well, no, it's not running your own affairs, is it?
Really?
It's being part of a UK, but having all the disadvantage of not redistributing wealth. That's what it is. If you are part of the UK, one economy, and that's the whole advantage of being in the UK. You have one economy, one currency, one set of industries, one market for us all. And wealth goes up and down the country. We know that parts of the country are greater in wealth, London, but in Scotland too, Aberdeen, Glasgow and Edinburgh, these are wealth-generating areas. The policy should be to redistribute wealth and share it across the whole of the country because it's generated by the whole of the country. If you opt out of that and just say, well, we'll share the market, but we won't have any of the benefits of sharing wealth, well, it's just, you're cutting off your nose to spite your face.
You don't think there's been quite a lot of wealth has gone to London over the last sort of, 30 or 40 years?
Well, I am not worried about Scotland surviving in any context whatsoever. absolutely not worried about it. We will survive no matter what, and we'll do well no matter what, because we're a prosperous country, a strong country. But I'd like to think that we do it on a fair level. We have to be fair to ourselves and fair to the rest of the UK. We do slightly want our cake and eat it sometimes in part of Britain. I just want a fair relationship. I don't feel exploited by the rest of the country. Spending in Scotland has always been, for 30 years or more, 10, 15 or even 20% higher than the rest of the country.
But so is our tax contribution.
Yeah, but our spending has been way greater than our tax contribution. So yes, we have paid more taxes, but we've gotten far more back. There is, at the moment, we have this discussion because John Swinney often talks about, and Salmon used to talk about, talks about a relative surplus. Trying to make the point that Scotland pays more in taxes. It calls it a relative surplus. A relative surplus is actually a debt. In other words, we're all running a deficit, and to call it a relative surplus is totally duplicitous. It disguises the fact that we're all running a debt, and we get far greater in spending, far greater in spending than the rest of the UK. Huge difference in terms of public services. Now, I don't think we should be grateful or dependent or anything like that. I just recognise that we should have a fair relationship. What I would like, the full fiscal autonomy, the part I do like the autonomy, but I like the responsibility and accountability it might bring. So I'm not afraid of it either.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen with control over income tax only, though, is it? Because you can't do anything to grow your economy. I mean, it's a trap, really, because the only way you're going to get extra money is by putting up income tax. And I mean, that's not the most popular of policies. It seems to have been designed to do that, does it not?
Well, do you think that the only reason to grow your economy is to grow the government's coffers? Because I disagree. I think that the main reason is to get people into employment and get them decent work and decent wages.
Yeah, prosperity, yeah.
So it's not about how much money the government takes off people. It's about how well they are doing individually and what you can do to support their jobs. And if you can improve the responsibility and accountability of the government in the time. But just as an example of the difficulty we have with the current administration and the fact we haven't landed these blows on them, this administration demands autonomy all the time and refuses to pass it down to local authorities, has absolutely constrained local authorities, imposed a council tax freeze well beyond the fact that, when it's doing any good, when you should be allowing local people to decide. It's up to local authorities. If you want a council tax frozen locally, elect your council to do that. Don't have it imposed centrally with no room.
Is that part of your kind of policy thrust, is to devolve more, but to existing local government? I mean, there's a debate about whether they're the right. Well, there's a constant debate about local government. Has been for the last 40 years. But do you think our current setup, kind of 32 councils, is the right one if we're going to devolve power to them?
I'll be honest with you. Constitutional change generally is not something I want to talk about. And you can make any system of government work. The 32 authorities is not perfect. It's no one would invent it, as it were, if you started from scratch. But it's what we've got. I don't see any difficulty in making it work. And it's not about just devolving power to local authorities, it's about devolving power to communities and to individuals if possible. It's trying to give people as much control over their own lives, as close to them as possible. But it certainly means returning responsibility and accountability to local authorities. Giving them not just control over council tax, but different income streams, so they're not totally dependent on council tax. And yes, working in the long term across all parties, that's another message I want to get across. I am willing to work with the SNP. I don't automatically discount them. So I'd be willing to work with them on something like a sustainable future for local authority finance, because I think it's a problem for all parties. Is
there something in a more collegiate form of politics, do you think? I mean, your first duty is opposition, that's clear. But, within that, so you're kind of indicating, really, there must be areas where there's kind of futile wars of words that really don't mean anything, and the public get bored with that stuff.
Yes, I do. I absolutely entirely share that view. Collegiate or cooperative or collaborative, I absolutely believe that was when we started the Scottish Parliament, we imbued it with a certain number of principles. We stated there were 4 principles, including sharing of power, including openness and transparency, and yet we haven't practice that, I don't think. We're actually getting more opposition. We're getting more like Westminster. Part of it is because the SNP got an absolute majority. But we don't have to respond. If somebody shouts at you, is the answer to shout back? The answer is to be firm and stand your ground, but it's not. It's to keep to reflect your own values and your own principles. So if you want to work with others, if you are a cooperator, cooperate across politics too. You mentioned earlier on that there were more people joining Labour. Yeah.
I mean, is there any plan to kind of consult those people at any stage? I think that's been another failure, frankly, of Labour leaderships, where you can alert them, there's been a defeat, so let's change the leader. But nobody ever says to the people who are voting for you and paying for you, what do you want?
Yeah.
What do you want us to do? What do you want us to be? What are we getting wrong?
Yeah.
That doesn't seem to happen.
Again, it's a key part of my campaign. I'm anxious when I'm doing my campaign not to bore people with the practical details, but well, it is, because it feels like it's process rather than values or policies or the big picture, the inspirational stuff. But actually, getting our party structure right is so important, because we do that, we elect a leader, and then quite often it's a very exclusive process, and then policies come out which don't reflect the values or don't seem to reflect the values we share. And so I'd absolutely want not just to give the policy-making process back to the party and make sure that we have perhaps even fewer policies, but clearly come straight from the members and supporters. I actually want to open the party up. So I want to get more people from the voluntary sector, from the private sector, from our unions, union members directly involved in shaping our policies. And I think that way, for example, just in the voluntary sector, we charge the voluntary sector, I think all the parties do, but charge them like £3,000 or £5,000 to attend our conferences. I mean, what kind of message is that? We should be opening our arms, trying to get them to take part in our conferences, speak from the floor, share policy ideas, not pretend that the Labour Party is a monopoly of wisdom in these things, but open ourselves out. And exactly the same goes for business, for employers, be the party for the whole of Scotland. And I think if we can do that, if we can open ourselves up and show, that we are, we're not telling people what's good for them, but we are actually here to reflect their views and to be on their side. I think that, again, is a much more attractive message. We are the People's Party, but we seem to forget sometimes.
Okay, just lastly, is it a kind of exciting prospect, or is it a kind of a scary prospect? Just the possibility that, I don't know. It looks like Kessie is ahead, is it not? Is that not? Or
No.
am I misreading that? Is that?
You are misreading that, because
Is that like MSP's voices, not people's voices?
that is exactly it. In fact, it's the party machine. I am absolutely standing for the members. Now,
you did go with the members the last time, didn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I won comfortably amongst the members, and if it had been one person, one vote, I'd have won then. But the point is, I am the voice of the members. I like to think I know what members think, because I've never been a career politician. I've never been part of that faction, these factions that try and carve up power within the party. And I think that, I understand why some of my elected colleagues have, behaved the way they are, but I think they're scared, I think they're worried about next year. And what I'm saying is that, we're not in it. None of us joined the Labour Party for ourselves. We joined it for you, Derek. We joined it for the people of Scotland. That's why we're in the party. And we need to remind people of that. And I think that certainly amongst the membership, I've had huge feedback, and I'm very optimistic. And yet, I am enjoying it. I know this sounds funny. Nobody makes you. Nobody makes you go into politics. It's a choice.
Yeah.
But you can see if it inspires you, and sometimes it's the difficult battles that inspire you more. So. Yeah. Okay, I've ruined my family's summer, but apart from that, it's good fun.
How many kids have you got now?
6.
6, dear.
I forget.
And politics too. Okay, Ken, thanks very much.
Derek, thank you.